Okay, good. It's quite noisy here, that's all.
Oh, is it? Yeah, well, I'm sat in the conservatory roasting, so.
Right, okay, as we approach 2:01, we will make a start with the webinar, and others joining can sort of come in as they will. So good afternoon to all our attendees today, and a welcome to this webinar about fraud and cyber awareness. Thank you for joining us. This webinar is delivered under Kingston upon Hull City Council's ICT for Growth support programme, which I can tell you a little bit more about at the end of the webinar and let you know what further support is available under the programme. But now I'd like to introduce our panellists from Humberside Police. So we have with us Detective Constable Christopher Coupland from the Cybercrime Investigation Team, and also Detective Sergeant Benjamin Robinson from the Economic Crime Unit. Before I hand over to them, I'd just like to make you aware that there is a Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. So during the webinar delivery, if you have any questions that you would like to ask, please feel free to post them there, and we will allow a bit of time at the end of the webinar for Christopher and Benjamin to pick up those questions and answer anything that you have asked. So yes, do have a look at that Q&A option and feel free to use it during the webinar delivery. So without any further ado, I'll pass over to our panellists.
Thank you very much. Chris, would you mind putting my presentation up?
Yep.
Okay, so as was said, my name's Ben Robinson. I'm the Detective Sergeant from the Economic Crime Unit of Humberside Police. And I'm going to sort of do a little bit of background, fill you in on what fraud actually looks like in Humberside, numbers-wise. I'm going to go over some of the different types of fraud that we see in this area. And whilst doing that, some tips on how to protect yourself. And then I'm going to hand you over to Chris, who will talk more about the cyber side of things. So without further ado, Chris, if I can have the first slide. So between April 2018 and March 2019, and I know these figures are slightly out of date, but we're waiting for the most up-to-date ones, which have been slightly delayed due to COVID. There were 6,875 people that reported that they were a victim of fraud in the Humberside area. Now, the reason why that is an important number to note is fraud is a really underreported offence. And actually, I've seen some articles that suggest that only 1 in 6 people report fraud. So you could see actually the picture is actually be a lot worse. If we could go to the next one, please. So the Office of National Statistics do some work into reported and unreported crime. For fraud, they established that it probably makes up of about 40% of all unreported and reported crime, which means you are more likely to be a victim of fraud than any other type of offence. And to compare it to another offence, you're 5 times more likely to be a victim of fraud than you are a victim of a robbery. And if we go to the next slide, please, Chris. And once you've been a victim of fraud, there's a 30% chance that you'll be a victim again within the next 12 months. There's a couple of reasons for this. The fraudsters will either sell your details on to their colleagues in the fraud world on the dark web, or they will simply use another MO to attack you and try and get some money out of you again. For example, you may have been the victim of an investment fraud. They then change their MO, send you an email claiming to be from a fraud recovery company and offering for a small fee, you can get your money back. So you can see part of our work is to try and prevent people becoming victims in the first place, but then also we have to educate people that once they've been a victim, there's a likelihood that they'll be a victim again. So if we can have the next slide. That's how much money was lost in the period, 8.6 million. And for the last year, the figure will be well in excess of that. I think it's around about £10 million that was lost. But once again, it's important to note that that's only from those people that have reported that they've been a victim to us. And the next one. And the next one. Okay. Why modern times, especially in recent times, this figure is particularly relevant. 81% of the offences that took place were cyber enabled. And that's why Chris is here with me today to talk about cybercrime and how to protect yourself. So that means that the offence took place somehow online, maybe through your mobile phone, computer, through the internet. And as you can imagine, over the last few months with everyone at home, the number of online shopping offences, for example, we saw go through the roof and actually makes up 25% of all reported frauds at this moment in time. Okay. And the next one. And the reason I'm here today and why Chris is here is because HMIC inspect police forces, and they did have a look at how all police forces investigate fraud. I took this line directly out of the report they wrote on it, and that's we cannot arrest our way out of this. And that's because a number of these offenders aren't actually within the UK. So there's nothing we can do. I can't go travel across to West Africa and arrest a romance fraud suspect. So what we have to do is get on the front foot and educate people about different types of fraud to try and prevent them from being victims in the first place. And that's why over the last year, we've invested a significant amount of time putting things in place to try and get more and more of the message out into the community about the types of offences to try and prevent people from becoming that victim in the first place. Okay, next one. So the first type of fraud I want to talk about is identity fraud. And this is a particularly important one to start on, because once you've had your identity stolen, that can then be used to undertake a number of different things. So the fraudster will more than likely look to obtain some sort of identity document or fraudulent document in your name that they can then use to open a bank account, potentially obtain other forms of credit. So it's really important that if somebody contacts you that you're not expecting, like your bank, mobile phone provider, something like that, that you're wary of that contact if you weren't expecting it. And actually what we always say is to take 5 minutes, so that if your bank calls you and asks or says there's a problem on your account, you put the phone down, and then on the back of your bank card there's a customer service number, and you ring your bank back and speak to them and see if there's actually a problem. Chris, if you can just click all the ones up on this slide, please. So there's a note we put there. I don't know if people are aware of the mail preference service and the telephone preference service. These are things that you can sign up to that actually blocks the amount of scam mail that you receive or scam telephone calls. If anyone's got any elderly relatives, this is a particularly good thing to get people signed up to. Make sure that you always update your settings on your computer, your mobile phone, because that will ensure that the security is up to date. Particularly relevant, the third point there, if you do get paper bank statements still, or documents that have your financial details on, make sure you securely destroy them. If you've got a shredder at home, shred them. There are companies that you can send your documents away to be securely destroyed, but that's really important so we don't give anyone the opportunity to steal your identity. Okay, on to the next one. Advance fee fraud. So this is when you will basically get some contact from the fraudsters who will be offering you something, often sounding too good to be true, but in order to get that, you will have to make some sort of small payment. So it might be that you've won a lottery or a cash prize, but to release those funds, you need to send the person some money through your bank account. And obviously one way to work out that that's a fraud is if you've never entered the Canadian lottery, then there's no possible way that you could be winning the Canadian lottery. So there's little things that we can educate ourselves and other people that there's no way you can win something if you haven't actually entered it. And there's some other things we've put there. Air hunters claiming that a long lost relative's died and left you money. You can do your own investigation into a lot of these things, and yeah, it might take you a little amount of time, but better to invest in sort of researching something yourself than paying over the money and finding out that it's a fraudster and you've lost out all your money. Okay, if we go to the next one. Okay, online shopping fraud. As I said, this makes up about 25% of all victims at the moment in the Humberside area. And what we're seeing a lot of the time is people buying and selling stuff through eBay, Gumtree, Facebook Marketplace. A lot of the time it tends to be mobile phones, technology, or a common trend we see at the moment is with pets and taking advantage of the COVID-19 situation where people can't go and actually look at the pet. So the fraudster will offer to ship the pet to the person, but obviously they have to pay for the animal, pay for the shipping. Then they'll come up that there's some sort of injections that the animal needs, and actually it doesn't actually exist. Same with mobile phones, trying to buy a mobile phone, and then they'll then contact PayPal or something like that, or eBay, to say that they haven't actually received the item. So they'll end up with your mobile phone and the refund back from yourself, and you'll be out of pocket of your device. So there's some basic things that we can do to try and protect ourselves when we're buying and selling stuff off online auction marketplace sites. One of those things is if someone's offering a brand new iPhone for sale, get the individual to take a photograph of it next to something relevant so it can prove that the item is actually in that person's possession, and it's not just an image that they've clipped off the internet. Another way to spot that something potentially might be fraudulent is if they're offering an item and it's a particularly bargain price. So say they're selling an Apple Watch, brand new Apple Series watch for 50 quid. There's a couple of things to think there. For 50 quid, if they do have it, it's probably stolen. And so they're just trying to make some money. And the second thing is 50 quid, that's too good to be true, so it's probably a fraud. So it's just a few little things we can do to check. I'm sure Chris will come on to actually looking at the website of the company, and I'll do a bit on that in a bit to check if it is actually who they say they are. But we can do some stuff there. I'd always suggest if something comes up and it looks like it's a bargain, research the company that is selling it. I'm sure everyone's aware we can Google ourselves and something will come up, or the same should happen for a company offering to sell something to you. And if we can go on to the next one. So here's an example of an email that was sent saying that there's a security problem with the Amazon account. When you go to log on to your Amazon account to correct that problem, you'll see in the bar, although it's the actual Amazon thing and it's just been spoofed, the website is actually different, and you can see it's very close to looking like the legitimate one, but by doing just a simple check of that, you can save yourself a lot of hassle. And the next one. Right, so computer service fraud involves somebody ringing up from someone like your internet provider, your bank, and they will say that there is a problem with the security on your account, and they will ask you to download some software, something like TeamViewer, onto your computer so they can access it and amend the security, fix the problem for you. Sometimes they will even charge you a small fee for fixing this alleged problem for you. Once they say it's fixed, they will ask you to log on to your online banking, and to check that the security is all in place. When you log on to your online banking, they will then take your money from in front of your eyes. So there's some basic things there. I've talked about the Take 5 messaging, but people like the police, HMRC, NCA will never ring up someone and say there's a problem in your bank account, you need to transfer the money into another account. We don't have accounts like that. That's not what we do. We'd never ask for your PIN number, and likewise the bank will never ring you up like that and say there's an issue and you need to transfer your money. So if you do receive a call from the police or HMRC or NCA saying that, you know it's a fraud. If it's from your bank, then we can follow those simple steps where we ring them up and establish if there's any problem. So if we go on to the next one. Investment fraud. Okay, this has seen a rise in this COVID period of people at home maybe looking to take advantage of the situation. The basis of this is if someone offers you an investment opportunity and the returns seem incredible, I would straight away be suspicious of that. And if we follow the sort of line of, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, then we can keep ourselves safe. And also, if someone had this incredible investment opportunity where you get massive 50% returns, I think everyone would have heard of them and everyone would be getting involved with that type of organization. But there are things we can do as well to check out the company. Google them, as with anything else. Check with the FCA to see if they're registered with them. Just take your time to research somebody who's offering you an investment before you invest in them. It's better to potentially lose that investment opportunity than lose all of your money by investing in them. So if we go to the next one. We weren't going to do this one. We'll click on. Okay, now more relevant as we directly connected with businesses. This is one type of fraud aimed specifically at business, and it's called CEO spoofing. And it's one to make staff aware, if they work in finance department, that this type of thing, especially in larger organizations, can take place. So what will happen is the email system of the company would have been compromised. So they'll have the details of the senior manager, and the fraudster will contact someone in the finance department, either by email or sometimes they'll even ring them if it's a large company, so they don't actually know the CEO is, and they will be putting pressure on that individual to transfer some money. It will be along the lines of they need to release some funds to pay for a contract, and if they don't release the funds, they're going to lose the contract. The company is going to get into significant financial difficulty. You know, the company might go bankrupt, this type of thing. It will be all really time critical stuff that those individuals have got to make that transfer of the money there and then. So it's really important that people in sort of role where they can release money from the company's accounts are aware that this type of thing can happen. And this is where you need to think potentially of your 2-point verification before larger payments are made. So so that one person potentially can't transfer large amounts of money out of company accounts. You need that second, think of that second step. So if the CEOs come to someone, the person at the bottom has to take that transfer to someone else before it's approved. And that way you've got a better chance of not falling victim of this type of offence. So if we go to the next one, please, Chris. And then we go, there's the ways that we can protect ourselves. So we check any unusual payment requests, and we'll move on to mandate fraud in a minute. And more importantly, with this one, as with any other type of fraud, really, if you think you've fallen victim to it, then the first thing you should do is contact your bank so you can try and prevent the money from leaving the bank, or the bank can take immediate steps to try and claw that money back whilst it is still within the UK. So if we click on to the next one. Okay, invoice mandate fraud. I can tell you that over the last year, we've seen at least one company fall victim of this type of offence and lose a large amount of money, in excess of £300,000. So this is where the company will receive an email from someone that appears to be a regular supplier or someone that they regularly pay money to. Okay, that your emails or would have been compromised, or if you are an organization and you're having some building work done, it's not too hard for a fraudster to see who's doing that work and then spoof an email claiming to come from that company, and it will say that they have changed their bank details, and that any invoices need to be paid into their new bank account. So much like with CEO fraud, one way we can try and stop this from happening is having that at least 2-point verification for any change in payment details, that has to be checked. If you do get an email from someone you already pay money to, then take the steps, do the due diligence, pick up the phone, and don't use the details that's on the email in front of you. Use another email when you know that that's a trusted number. Contact the company and ask them if they've changed their details. And then by taking those steps, you'll protect yourself every single time, because obviously they won't have changed their details. Okay. Right. Long and short firm fraud. This is what the Crays used to do back a few years ago. So this is where a company is set up and it will fake its accounts, its credit score, and it will then contact as many companies as possible, depending on what it's claiming to be, and get as much credit as it can with those companies. And normally that would be 30 to 60 days, run up the credit, and then the firm will simply disappear. I myself have investigated one of these offences, and they are incredibly professional at what they do. They set up a business in Hull. They got items delivered to a warehouse, and then as soon as the credit ran out, as it were, and the company started requesting payment, they simply disappeared almost off the face of the earth. It was unbelievable how they did it. So you need to be really on your guard for this type of offence, and more importantly, aware that this type of offence occurs. So if a new company approaches you asking for your product, do the checks, do the credit checks on them, Google the firm. When you Google the firm, look at the website. Does it look legitimate, or is it a bit one-dimensional? So it might have a nice front page, but actually there's nothing else behind the website that you would expect to see in a normal company. You can do reverse images, so you can take parts of the website, put it into Google, and see where that image has actually come from, to see if they've simply taken the images from another person's website. And at the end of the day, if you are suspicious, you're probably right. So don't do the business with the people. It's better to lose a little bit of custom than to lose a large amount of money. And these people are very professional at what they do. So be suspicious if someone suddenly comes along offering or asking for a large amount of product and you've never heard of them before. These little things should all be little, making the sort of hairs go up on the back of your neck that something isn't right here. Where's this person come from? Why are they getting stuff delivered to a warehouse when they're claiming to be a different type of business? Be very aware of these. Okay, Chris? So I've just done this to show you how easy potentially it is to spoof a website. So all I did was go onto GoDaddy, the website, and put in Handelsbanken, so a bank that I did some work for. And you can see for a small amount of money, really, you can buy the domain name handelsbanken.company, £7.90. Then if you look on the right-hand side of the screen, you can buy a green padlock, the very low-level one, for £25. So for just over £30, I can set up a website with a name that looks legitimate, I can then spoof that company's website and then start to send you information from there. I've done it with Humberside Police as well, and you can buy the domain name thehumbersidepolice.co.uk. So you imagine I set up that website as a fraudster, I've got the padlock on there, I then send you an email saying we've caught you speeding, or we know what you've been doing on the internet, or you've got a fine for some part of your business, and you need to follow the link on the email. It takes you to a website which all looks legit because it's spoofed the name, spoofed the website. So you'll see fraudsters are incredibly professional, and I'm sure you'll realize all that green padlock does on your website is protects you from attacks from someone getting information off your website. So me as a fraudster, all that would do is protect me from other fraudsters stealing your details off my website. So if we go to the next slide, Chris. Just so you're aware, fraud is reported in a different way to all other types of offence because of the transient nature of how the offending takes place. You actually report it to Action Fraud, which is hosted by the City of London Police. So your call will go into there. They will then look to see if there's any viable lines of inquiry. And by that, it's can they identify a bank account? Can they identify the owner of that bank account? And if they can, your investigation will then get sent to the force where the suspect originates in. Okay, so that's different to other type of offence where you would report it to Humberside Police and we would investigate your offence. What we have in Humberside to look after the more vulnerable victims is something we called Operation Signature. So that is when we get a report that somebody, maybe an elderly person who's been the victim of fraud, we put a special bespoke safeguarding package around that individual to prevent them from becoming the figure of the 30% within the next 12 months, and also to ensure that they can get themselves back on their feet from the offending that's been committed against them. Now that might be that we help them to contact their bank, or we look at the other issues that's led to them becoming a victim in the first place. Next one, Chris, I think we might be nearly there. So as with Chris, he'd probably want to give this message as well. Whenever we give presentations, it's important that we get the people that have listened to what we've got to say to at least share some. If you've remembered anything from the talk, tell 2 people about that. Encourage people to look at websites like Take 5, Friends Against Scams, Action Fraud, and then get those 2 people to tell 2, because through word of mouth, we can spread throughout the area what type of fraud happens, little tips on how to protect ourselves. And it's really important, and I'd ask you to do that tonight, even if you just tell your partner, your parents, whoever, people back at the office, things to look out for. I think that's my last one, isn't it, Chris?
One more.
And there we go. There's some of the sites I mentioned. If you've ever been the victim of identity theft, if you go onto the CFAS, if you type that into the internet, for about £25 you can register with them, and they will put an extra layer of security around you so that if anyone tries to take out credit in your name, you will get a text message or call to your mobile phone advising you that that's taking place. And that goes back almost to some of the sort of messaging when we were talking about CEO fraud, mandate fraud. Have that extra level of protection built into your own company to prevent someone from taking advantage. So that's my bit. Thank you very much. I hope you've got something out of what I've said there, and I'll let Chris take over now. I'll stop my video as well.
Ben's gone. 2 seconds.
I'm still here. I'll get rid of my camera so I don't distract.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Following on from Ben then, obviously my side of Humberside Police is investigating into the cybercrime arena, primarily more to do with the cyber-dependent crimes covered by the Computer Misuse Act offences. Hackings, malware attacks, spoofed emails, all those types of offences. We do link in quite nicely with Ben, hence the reason why I think we're being put together here, because a lot of the frauds that Ben deals with and in some way have been linked to some form of internet usage. So there is a very nice link there, so it's quite good we work together. My presentation has a little bit of humour throughout it. It's got a bit of imagery, etc., but it's trying obviously just to get the point across on how big a scale this thing is. Okay. Obviously, my first one is probably most people do understand the internet. They know that pretty much what we Google is only about 4% of what we see. The rest of it is where the Google content is, or all the website content. But we only actually see the little top bit. And underneath there in the little dark area is what we obviously name as the dark web, where all the naughty folk live. Although they do say 70% of users are all police officers, but we won't say anything about that. A little while ago, basically back in 2016, it's an old stat, but it is very relevant at the moment. Jens Stoltenberg had a NATO meeting. They've now categorized cyberspace as an operational domain. That was spoken about at that meeting, but it has actually been confirmed. It now is an operational domain, the same as air, sea, land. So where we used to do a little bit of that with our knives and forks and stab each other and shoot each other, all we do now is just press buttons. That's really all we do anymore. We don't really go out there on the field. So if there was any further forthcoming wars, I don't think there's going to be much happening on the front line. Internet Minute is quite interesting to see how this has developed. We have quite a lot of these infographics throughout the years, going through like every single minute of every single day. So if you think we've been on the call 33 minutes so far, every single minute since then, someone sent 19 million text messages, Snapchat, WhatsApp, Instagram. This is the amount of data that's going through. I was on a call a couple of days ago with the UK North networking, it's a blog area, and the gent came on there and stated that the internet usage has gone up 80% since COVID started. So these figures here are totally incorrect. But it just shows you on how busy the day-to-day life is of the internet and what's out there really for suspects to take away. A little while ago, back in, there was basically cyber breaches. They classify them obviously quite serious, and nearly 7 out of 10 large businesses will be affected in some way. They put us an average cost of £20,000, and I'm sure Ben can concur with this. We have had companies lose considerably more than that as an individual company. Some in the whole area, one I know personally we dealt with was 96,000. So you can be unfortunate, be suspect to a lot of money. And the questions there is, what are you going to do regards to that if it ever happens to you? So we'll obviously try and talk about things that we'll try and think about what you can put in place to alleviate the issues, hopefully. Oops, that's the wrong button. So as stats generate, they normally are at least a year or so behind. The last stat here, 17 million Britons were hit by cybercrime. That's pretty much all the areas. That's including Scotland, Wales, Ireland, etc. It says cybercrime accounts for more than 50% of crime in the UK. We call it cybercrime, but that also includes enabled and dependent. So obviously there may be a percentage of that regards to the fraud aspect as well and other offences. So if you think on how big it is, in 2018, hackers stole £461 billion online. 21 billion was from British internet users. And if you compare that to the global heroin industry currently in 2018, that was only 270 billion. So cyber is about £200 million more profitable than cocaine and cannabis, and statistically considerably easier to hide your identity. So hence the reason why a lot of people are moving towards online scams, etc., and the usual call centres. So most people may have this vision of the everyday hacker sat behind their televisions with a hoodie over themselves eating Wotsits. It's no different to you or I, really. Basically, people could be hackers from any generation. You could walk past one in the street and you would know no difference. They're an everyday person that just has the skills to do what they do. Most of the ones that we see on a general day-to-day, obviously there's your standard phishing emails, and then we generated, obviously with mobile phones, etc. The phishing is obviously the voice, where they ring you up and pretend to be someone, like your computer service frauds, things like that. Smishing is SMS, text messages, where you get your HMIC messages to say that you need a tax rebate, and we won't love one of those, but they're probably not happening. Password breaches. There's been a bit of a change in passwords, which I'll get to as we're going along, on how they've managed to get around a lot of things that they do these days, where they've moved away from actual brute forcing passwords. Now there's other ways of doing it considerably more successfully. Old software and hardware, patches, big issue there. Microsoft have identified the fact is that it's such a big issue, they now call it, obviously, Microsoft Update Tuesday. So instead of them giving updates randomly, they now have stipulated that they will launch updates that are necessary every Tuesday. So we all know that they're a total pain. We all know that they take hours out your day. And if you work for a big corporate business, or even some of the SMEs, which obviously have a certain quantity of employments, it can take a bit of time to implement those patches. And if you do implement those patches, what effect is that going to have on the rest of your actual processes, programs, working life, etc.? So you've got to consider the times and when you're going to do these updates and when you're going to do these patches. Obviously, there's lots of discussions about that, and when you can do it and when you can't, and so on. Payment diversion frauds and mandate frauds, that's something that does come into cyber, where they'll basically, one of the ones I know, where they breached the email address. They were sending messages between the CEO and the finance and asking money to be sent to a particular bank account. The messages were working perfectly well between the CEO and the finance officer. Unfortunately, the CEO was the hacker, and every email went to the RSS feed, because whoever reads RSS feeds, marked as read, RSS feed, nobody ever knew this conversation happened between them and the finance officers. The funny thing was, the finance officer was on the same floor, so if they did as Ben said, turn your chair around and ask them, they would have realised it was quite a big fraud, but that can happen. Phishing, very common. Obviously, we do receive these emails every single day, offering services we've never even asked of, offering products that we've never even wanted, and highly likely within the background of that email there will be some form of link, malware, remote access, or something to get your data. Okay, the phishing has been around for a long time. It's probably one of the early days ones, but it is current, it is huge, and it is still common today. So it's, what can you do regards to those? What you're going to do with the members of staff, or even yourself, that click a link, you've opened the malware, you've opened the spyware. What are you going to do with regards to that particular scenario? What's your contingencies about that? Which will cover in a minute as we're going through. But you've got to start thinking about, if one of my members of staff did open a link and they did manage to download malware onto my computers, what are we going to do as a company? Are we going to survive? Are we going to, what's your maximum tolerable downtime for the time that you can actually recover your company before, unfortunately, it has to cease trading? And the financial aspects, obviously, after COVID, is that a lot of companies won't have the spare cash that they may have had prior to COVID, obviously with everyone being in isolation and so on. So it's a major concern at the moment that companies may not be able to survive an attack if everyone happens. So it's got to be a thought process that people start thinking about today. Phishings, Ben mentioned about URLs on websites. You can pick these up for pence, really. Even IP addresses. If I wanted to find the CEO, I found out where they lived, I can buy an IP address in the same town that this person lives. So when I do send any emails, the IP address comes back to the same area where the CEO lives, or even the finance officer or whoever. But you can pick them up for a couple of pence online, an IP address fixated to a geolocation, just to make it a little bit more realistic. Obviously this one here, it's PayPal, but as you'll notice it says service.paypal, the I in the middle there. That is one that did exist. This is actually one that we dealt with, and that is a URL that somebody did buy. So increases your panic level. The amount of people that when they look back and ask themselves why did they do what they did, they start answering the question that, well, it threatened to sort of like take my internet down, or it threatened to take over my bank account, or it said I was going to lose all my money out my savings, or they tried to increase the panic. And we all panic as natural. But the thing is, what like Ben mentioned a second ago, is take that few seconds, take a couple of seconds before you act on anything that comes through. And if you, well, you know, you don't have to be too technical, but if you wanted to go that technical aspect, you can Google on how to look at an email header and start looking in there. But that's going really techie. But look at the imaging, look at the spelling. Is it trying to scare you to death to make you click a link? Okay, because that link can do one of a million things. If you hover over the link, it will highly likely show you something that's not quite true. So just take a few seconds to check them out. Same again, this one here was the actual website. It looked exactly like PayPal. It was no different. Every page that you clicked on, you buy, you sell, you send, etc., looked exactly the same as the last page. And if you open both together, it looked identical. The only difference being is when the people clicked on the links on this particular website, all the data you typed in got stolen. And they use that obviously for nefarious reasons, bank accounts, etc. Smishing and vishing, very, very popular these days with the new mobile phones that probably carry more power and data than my laptop. So obviously there's a big debate currently between so like Apple's and Google Android and etc on the platforms and what you can and can't do on a particular platform. Not scaring anybody, current stats is around about 80% of viruses, Android, 18 or so on Apple. So I don't think Apple's are impervious because they're not. And then the rest is another, like Microsoft, their mobiles and Nokias and things like that. So, but only because the Google platform, the Android platform is a free platform. You can download it, you can do your own building, you can do whatever you want with it. And Apple are a little bit more of a problem to get around that, but it happens, it's not impervious, so we can't sit back and think, oh, it won't happen to me, I've got an Apple. Well, it will. Remote access Trojans, laptops, mobile phones, pretty much every device you can buy these days have some form of camera on them, hence what we're using today. These can be taken over. Many well, you can buy on Amazon for a few pence or so. You can buy webcam covers, get one stuck over your webcam. If you don't need your webcam, close it off, don't let them use it. A little while ago, well, a few years ago now, Facebook on their terms and conditions gave access to people's cameras, and they were monitoring people's lives, and hence the reason why you got lots of selling pitches to buy things that, oh, I was only talking about that yesterday. They did get told off for that, and that has changed, but just be careful on webcams. There's websites out there that if you have home security cameras or even company security cameras, you can go on there as long as you have the IP address and where they're attached to. If you've not changed your passwords for your security cameras, highly likely somebody will gain access to them and they'll be monitoring your business from afar. Emails, they'll always come in some way. They'll come to you in a particular way, whether it's a program, an email. Years and years ago, I'm sure my age now, you used to get free discs of programs on fronts of magazines and you used to download them because you got a free version of AOL. Now I am sure my age. Following that, what they realized was a lot of these discs did create viruses and have issues, but that was back in the day where viruses and stuff like that wasn't really recognized much, but that's changed. So payments, banking, obviously in regards to the action fraud side of things, browsing history, clear your cache history, get rid of all the data that you don't need. There's loads and loads of programs out there, whether it's antivirus, anti-malware, that can do all this for you. CC Clean is one that's a good one for clearing browser history and getting rid of rubbish out of your computer. So there's many things out there that you can use. This is about £7.50 or about $9 off eBay. Within that lovely free lightning cable that we found on the car park floor, there's a SIM card, there's a memory card. So any data that goes through that cable gets sent out to whichever SIM card or the owner of the SIM card at the other end of it. And you can buy them, they are free, clearly not illegal to own. Unfortunately, it's what you do with them. So the little cover clips off, put whatever SIM card you want in. If you want to hold some data, you can put a reasonable size memory card in there as well. So if you're wandering around, consideration for this for a business is your USB access points on all your networks. Are they locked? Can you connect anything to them? I know in Humberside, all our USB ports are pretty much decommissioned and we have to be whitelisted to access the USB ports and so on. If somebody came into your company, into your business and started plugging things in like their mobile phones, do you know that that mobile phone isn't carrying some form of virus or some form of malware that's all it's going to do is port itself straight into your network? If it is something that you do use all the time because you allow people to bring their own devices into the company, that's not an issue. I know a company that I worked with that all they did was on, you can buy, if you allow them to charge their mobile phones, etc., you can buy a little conversion, USB to USB, USB to USB-C, but they're not data cables, the power only cables. So you are allowed to charge, but it won't transfer data. And you can buy them in packs of whatever off, you know, the usual selling sites online. I know a few companies that have bought those and issued them one personally to all their staff, but it depends on how many staff you are as whether that's cost effective or not, or disconnect them. Ransomware, this can pretty much cause carnage. Comes in through your system as pretty much everything else, whether it's by email, whether it's by a program, whether it's by someone bringing their own device. If you do allow bring your own devices, that people are bringing laptops into your company and connecting to your servers, one thing you really need to think about and consider is, do you implement any instructions for that person to what type of security they're going to have on their personal devices? Just bearing in mind they're coming to connect to your network, so you really need to be comfortable that their computer is not riddled with programs or viruses or, remote access Trojans, etc. So at least have some consideration of, right, okay, you can bring your own laptop, but you really need to have some form of malware protection or some form of antivirus protection. And they have to really look after their devices to make it secure for your network. Bring your own devices there's loads of questions on bringing your own devices. And obviously if there's any questions regards at the very end, then we can answer them, or in due course, we can answer them. We can get back to you. Remote access Trojans, we have seen many companies that have received ransomware, malware, goes in there, takes over all your systems, encrypts all your drives, and then sends you a lovely email to explain how you can get yourself out of it, because they're really helpful like that. Normally, the olden, when it happened, like WannaCry and things like that, this was pretty much the screen you used to get. It'll explain what's happening, because they like being really helpful. The good thing is that they'll increase the threat and the percentage of loss of data. So they'll give you a countdown timer. So if you pay it before the countdown runs out, then you can have a reduction in your payment. Customer service lines, if you click that contact us button at the very bottom, it is a contact us line, it is a helpline. They will even explain and talk to you through how to open yourself a Bitcoin wallet. They are normally helpline during the day, hackers on a night. The ransom demand will be normally some form of electrocurrency, whether it be Bitcoin, Litecoin, there's millions of them now. Bitcoin was big in the day. Can it be traced? Yes and no. It can take a long time. You normally trace it to the owner of the server, and then it's up to them whether they want to tell you about the offenders. And as Ben alluded to a minute ago, it's more to do with where are those servers, what country are they in, and do they normally have some form of sharing agreement between ourselves and the UK and the owners of the servers. But this can be very problematic. To get around it, there is only one sure way to get around this particular issue, and that is back up your data. Unfortunately, backups are costly, and the question there is whether you're going to have sort of like incremental backups, so you're going to do it regularly, you're going to do it daily, monthly, etc. That's really a sort of like a thought process on how regularly that you do them. But this is the one and only sure way of getting yourself out of a malware attack or a ransomware and so on. The reason being, we've had a number of companies that have paid the ransomware. One company, the IT company, paid the ransomware because it was an error on their behalf. That didn't work. It started to unencrypt all the data, superb. Unfortunately, they didn't get all of the virus out of the systems. So shortly after that, it encrypted it all again. So they sent an email to them saying, can I have a new decrypt key? And their response was, yes, of course you can, for another 4 Bitcoin. Once you're a payer, they know that you're a payer, and they will hound you, whether it be malware attacks, ransomware attacks, service frauds. You now are listed as somebody that will get their hands in their pockets and start paying. So it's something that we would never agree with. We'd never say, go, yes, pay the ransomware. But that is a company decision, not a police's decision. But we certainly wouldn't advise it. Air gap, that is a mandatory. You need to keep your backups separate from your servers. We had one company that took every single thing. They flattened everything about that company, and their backups were connected to the servers. The good thing is, unbeknown to us at the time, is the backups were in an operating system called Linux, and this particular malware only attacked Windows. So all their backups were still perfectly okay. So they recovered from their backups. good luck than good judgment, but luckily it worked. So it's a big consideration. Backups is your only sure way to get out of a ransomware attack and the way to recover your company. Whether it's regular, you might lose a week, you might lose a couple of days, but at least have some form of backups. And check the work. It's okay doing backups, but if you don't check the work, how do you know they're going to work on D-Day? You need to make sure that you do a regular check of what you've backed up that actually does work, and it's going to do its job at the end of the day. Victimized organizations. There's a couple of stats came out in 2019 from the Cyber Threat Defense Report. Obviously the ransoms rose from 38.7% to 45%. And these were the victims responded to a ransomware. So people are making that decision to pay, and 9 times out of 10 the reason why they do pay is because they don't have backups. If they have backups, they would just flatten their system and restore, so they may lose a few days or maybe a week. Another consideration of backups is how fast can your backups restore? Some cloud service providers will allow you to download your data in mass bulk. Unfortunately, to restore your data, we had one company that had to restore a file at a time. So it took them just short of 3 weeks to restore their company. And that wasn't because they didn't have backups. It was because they didn't realize that when they want the data back from the storage repository, it came back as a file at a time. So that is always also a consideration. Cryptojacking. I don't know whether anybody out there has realized that maybe their servers are becoming a little slow, and we all blame our service providers, don't we? That, you know, the rubbish, and they don't provide us with a decent set of internet. We have had some companies, when they've had a little bit of a review into the structure of their servers and things like that, they've realized that there's a piece of code that's been placed into your network. It's not causing any particular problems. It's just stealing your processing power to be able for somebody to mine Bitcoin. So if they manage to get a robotic network of, say, 1,000 computers with this particular code in, then that's a lot of processing power for them to generate Bitcoin. So they can make themselves a considerable amount of profit from Bitcoin. So they're not stealing your data, they're not stealing anything that belongs to you, they're just using your processing power of your internet. So it's always one to consider if you suddenly start seeing a big decline in your speeds. I mean, I'm not talking just like a fluctuation, maybe sometimes it happens overnight and it slows down. So it's something to think about. Is there any codes that's been put into your systems that really shouldn't be there? So we've had a few of those come through as well. Talking about passwords, this gent was on the news. The Hawaiian Emergency Centre, I forgot to change that to Y to move it up a bit, but it's the Hawaiian Emergency Centre. And he decided to type his password for his system on a sticky note on his computer. And clearly that got blown up by the press, and they realised that his password was warning point 2. So just be careful where you stick your passwords. You never know who's looking at it, especially when he was on the telly. Password spraying. This is one that's changed from hacking passwords. The reason why is that they realised quickly that if you type in a username, normally an email address, with a password and it fails, you type in another password and it fails. Eventually that system, if it's programmed correctly, will say, hang on a minute, you've had too many attempts here, we're going to lock you out, whether it be for 5 minutes, permanently, or whichever, but it's going to lock you out. So what they're doing now is that they're using passwords against multiple accounts. So they're only using one password at a time against thousands of accounts. And eventually, somebody out there will use one of the usual top 20 worst passwords, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. And they will manage to get into their systems. The difficulty there is that most people have an unhealthy habit of using the same passwords and login details for all their accounts. So they end up breaching not only one account, they end up breaching multiple accounts, and that's really prevalent on people's social media accounts. So if anyone out there does have the same username and password throughout their email account or their social media or their own accounts, is consider changing them. That's easily breached, definitely. Passwords, as I say, there's a new slant. Most of our systems are programmed to sort of like the uppercase, lowercase, special characters, etc., etc. That is really, really easy to break, even on password cracking. The reason for that is because computers can be told to change I's to ones, noughts to zeros, ats to you know, A's and things like that. So it's very easy for a computer to try multiples of different letters. This is a thing called what for words or what three words. You can Google it and it will come up with the website and show you all about the thought processes. If you use 4 random words exactly here, maybe an uppercase at the beginning of each word, you'll find that considerably increases the strength of the password. And if it needs a number or a special character, put one at the end or one at each end. But you don't have to use seriously complicated passwords to make it stronger. So that's, as I say, what 3 words or what 4 words, depending on, you know, how you want to type it. But they'll both come up if you want to look into that. Yeah, as I already said, please no default passwords. You can check your password security. There is a website called How Strong Is My Password. Please don't type your own passwords into this. Just type in passwords that you consider that you might use, something similar structure, but don't use passwords that you will use. Just the fact is that you just don't know who's at the other end of the website. We do trust it, but you just never know. Another one called Have I Been Pwned? It's an email checking service by Troy Hunt from America. He trawls the internet finding breach data. If anyone wishes to type in their email addresses into this, then it will check whether your email addresses are on breached databases. The likes of Yahoo, the likes of Uber, you know, people like that that have lots and lots of data stolen. For example, this one, LinkedIn, 164 million records stolen. That's passwords, email addresses, etc. You can put your own in and have a look to see if it's breached. Because if it is breached, it's one way of building a profile of somebody. If they've managed to get your data from the dark web on the dark marketplaces, then there's a chance that they're going to build a profile about you. So don't panic too much though. Change your passwords. That's not laid out right, is it? Basically, if you think you've already been breached, don't worry too much, but you need to change your passwords regularly. Consider changing the style and the structure of them as well. Don't just use your dog's name with a 1 and then your dog's name then a 2, because that really won't work. Ben's already mentioned like 2-factor authentication, or actually 3-factor authentication now, because obviously you've got your facial recognition and fingerprint recognition, etc. Bearing in mind, these also come with a little bit of problems, because the problem is for every positive, there's always a negative. You need to consider what you're going to put as the recovery email or the recovery password or the recovery mobile phone. The reason why I say that is like Joel Ortez in America stole £7.5 million from people's accounts using 2-factor authentication. What he did was breach the mobile phone, and every time someone sent a recovery email, it went to his mobile phone instead of theirs. So then he could recover into the email address and get into bank accounts and steal money. He did get 10 years for doing that, like, but you've got to consider what you're going to put as your recovery email and recovery passwords and so on. Password managers, fantastic. However, don't forget your login password, because if you forget your one and only password to get into your password manager, you've forgotten them all. So you've got to think about these things. Remember, one password, you can lock them all away, but forget that one password, you've got a bit of a problem. So a couple of things to think about regards to this is obviously bring your own devices. Big considerations for companies. especially currently when people are working from home and then bringing back data when they come back into the office. Device hygiene, make sure that you have some form of control over what your members of staff are using and not using. Patches, password managers, etc. Removal of media restrictions. Are you going to allow them to play whatever they want on your computer systems? Group and hierarchy, basically what type of level of administration rights you're going to give to all these individual people. Encryption, data in transit, data in storage. GDPR obviously created yet another big monster regards to loss of data. White and blacklist sites and apps and everything else on your systems. If you don't want them to go to that site, don't let them go to that site, block it. Backups, massive. I should have put that in bold, in red. Backups, offline, make sure they work. Avoid single point of failure. Don't give one person the power of over lots of things. Because if that one person either goes off sick or is missing, gone on holiday, that you suddenly find out that Jeff in IT that knows everything about everything is not there, then you've got a bit of a problem there. Disaster recovery and business continuity, consider that as well. Okay, so a couple of little websites. Action Fraud is one of them, which Ben mentioned. It is also the fraud and cybercrime reporting mechanism that works exactly like fraud does. It's location based, where offender location first, complainant location second if we don't know the offender. NCSE's website has a great guide on 10 steps to cybersecurity. They also have small charity guides as well now, because they've realized that a lot of small charities are pretty same as a small business. They're probably more towards the micro businesses, but they still have assets, they still have money, they still have a network in some way, shape or form. So they brought out 2 new guides, small business and small charity, and you can download those off the website. HM government website, cyberaware.gov.uk, loads and loads of resources, loads of advice, you can go on there as well. And the other one, Get Safe Online. Get Safe Online is basically full of personal advice as well as business advice, and they try to keep that pretty much up to date and as current as they can. So if you're worried about something, go in there, put it in the search engine, and you'll probably find some form of advice. The same as all the others, really. Cyber Essentials is, I think, my last slide before I hand over. I've probably run over a little. Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus and ISO 27001. If you're going to do work with many government organisations and other organisations as well, some of them insist on a level of cyber security or cyber awareness. There's been some research done, so they've said around about 70% of companies think that their staff are either trained or have the knowledge or skill set to deal with some form of cyber attack. And that's 77%. I found that slightly high, but that's a thought process. So consider looking at Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus, or if you've really got some time, ISO 27001. It just gives you that extra credibility as a company that you at least consider cybercrime. And if I am mistaken, that could be my last slide. Yes, it is. So I'll hand back over. Thank you very much. I'll hand back over to
Right, thank you very much, Christopher and Benjamin, for your time to be with us today and deliver this really important topic about cyber awareness and fraud awareness. That's been really informative, and I'm sure, hoping everybody here will agree that there's been some important insight to take away there. So before we come to any question and answers that there might be, I'd like to just let you know about support that's available under the ICT for Growth programme. So those who joined a little bit later in the webinar, this webinar is being delivered under Kingston upon Hull City Council's ICT for Growth programme, and further support available under that is more webinars of this sort, so on specific topics and more general topics as well. So we can send you details of upcoming webinars. The other strand of the support available under ICT for Growth is the Digital Catalyst Support Programme, where we have a team of specialists who can work with you to find out your needs as a business. So it's very much one-to-one support, and they can help you to implement what might be needed for your business to adopt digital technology. As I say, it's very much one-to-one, so it will be tailored to your requirements and your needs. There's no agenda on which application or technology you should use, so it's very objective and impartial advice that you will get, advice and support. And again, it's really about what's best for your business. It's fully funded, so there won't be a cost to your business. And we can sort of contact you after this event to let you know how you can find out more about that support programme and where you can obtain further information, or how you can get in touch with us to talk to us about how you can come onto that programme of support. So that's everything from me. So there was a question that we had from one of our attendees, which I believe Detective and Benjamin, you've already answered there, but if there are any further questions, you are all on mute by default, but we can unmute you, or if you would prefer to just post your question on the Q&A option at the bottom, please feel free to do so. So we will hold on for sort of 5 or 10 minutes stay here in case there is anything that anybody would like to ask. Okay, just whilst we're waiting for any questions and answers, there is also a feedback poll that we would like to do, just to understand what you have thought about this webinar. So that should appear on your screen now. So before you do go, if you'd just be able to answer that for us, that would be great.